What's going on, guys? Carter here. Got another video for you. We're taking a look at something kind of cool, something kind of different, maybe. Obviously, this is an Emerson knife. This is the CQC-8. I think that's pretty apparent. But what is this thing hanging off the back that almost looks like a flipper tab? It almost looks like something you could use to deploy the blade. Look at that, you can. This is one of the very few flipper knives that Emerson makes. And it's a pretty interesting one because it is not obviously a new model. It's a very legacy, popular model. This is an early model from Ernest Emerson's tactical line. And so for him to put a flipper on it, it's pretty cool, pretty interesting that he would do that. However, there is something I don't like about this knife, and we'll talk about that here in a minute. So before we get too far into it, I've actually got a regular CQC-8 here. Let's talk about differences and similarities between the manual and the flipper version. So these are both new production. This one was made maybe a couple months ago. This one was made a couple weeks ago. This is the latest run of the flipper, and this is the latest run of the Thunderstorm regular. So sizes, same. Scales, same. Thickness of blade, same. Thickness of scales, same. Thumb disc deployment, same. I've got an aftermarket thumb disc on this one, but it came with this same one. So very, very similar because it's essentially the same knife, but there are some surprising differences. So let's start with, so handle thickness, that's all the same. Just like Emerson, right? Love it or hate it. Pros and cons, their knives are all very much the same. It's really just two-dimensional differences in blade, some grind, stuff like that, but same material, same thicknesses, interchangeable parts, which is kind of cool sometimes. Most of the time it's kind of cool. Sometimes anyways. So differences. So the standoffs, this uses the big, larger silver stainless standoffs. This one uses the smaller ones that came out when the standoff thing first started back in like 2013. I think they started to transition into standoffs, and they use these smaller dark ones. So I was surprised to see these on here. It is always kind of interesting. I keep track of kind of these new features on Emerson's and when they come around, and it's pretty interesting to see things just slowly transition. It takes a long time for Emerson to slowly transition out of everything. Prime example of that is the dual detent tab you'll still sometimes find cut out on the non-lock side. It's not usable, not functional. They don't put a detent ball in there, they don't bend it out, but some models they haven't gotten rid of, the programming to put that in. Some models they have, like the Commander is completely updated. And for example, on this one, talking about differences, in the scales, see if we can see it here. Right in there, I don't know if you can see it. You see that hole on this liner, and there's a hole on that liner. So that is where the stop pin goes on the regular version right there. But for this one, it doesn't use a stop pin right there. It uses a different thing. But, rather than create a scale and remove cutting out that hole, they just cut that hole and then added another hole to make this one function. And so the big differences between the two is a lot. So I'm trying to think of the best way to describe this. So there's a couple different flipper models. The Sheepdog is the first one. There's this one. They do the CQC-7 flipper, and then they do like mini Sheepdog and mini flipper CQC-7. I think that's all of the flipper knives. And then there's the Iron Dragon, which runs on bearings like this one, but it doesn't have a flipper. But this one differs from the Sheepdog. I'm not sure on the CQC-7. The Sheepdog uses a standard stop pin like this, an external, I guess you wouldn't call it external, but a separate stop pin where the tang hits it, and that's it. This one does something completely different. So the stop pin goes through both scales, but it's located back here. And then there is a milled channel in the tang that acts as the closed and open position, if that makes sense. So you can see the stop pin's actually up here. You can kind of see it right there. And then there's a channel milled in here. So that stop pin is inside that channel, and then it hits the end of the channel here, and then it hits the end of the channel here. And that's what acts as the closed and open position. So a completely different open closed position than this one, which is pretty interesting. Like I mentioned, this is running on bearings, so it has ceramic bearings in here. It also has a steel washer to protect the bearings against the titanium liners, which is the other big change, is these are both titanium liners in here. Whereas on your standard one, you only have titanium on the lock side and stainless steel on the other side. I do not know why. I have no idea why. I've been trying to think of why that is, and I cannot think of why that would have been done. I can't think of any reason why that needed to be done, why it couldn't be the same setup. It would be cool if maybe that magically means they're going to switch to all tie. But what that does mean is a huge difference in weight. So these are essentially the same. Like I said, I got a different thumb disc on there. This one has the slightly bigger standoffs, but it's the same steel, same thickness, same width, same materials, and yet the standard one's pretty chunky at 6 ounces, but this flipper shaves almost a whole ounce off, 5.1 ounces. And that is the first thing I noticed when I opened this knife and brought it out of the box is I'm like, this thing is light. It's light, but it feels good. Like it feels really balanced, and it is really balanced. It's balanced very well. The standard CQC-8 is a little bit, it's a little heavy. And, you know, I kind of appreciate that. It does give you a little more heft. It feels more like a tool. But it is a little on the heavy side, I think, for the size of knife. And so this one is really cool how it shaves that down. For the longest time, I couldn't quite figure out how they did that. The only thing I can think of is that it's dual titanium liners. And then that asks, or that begs the other question, why do that on this model and no other models? Very interesting. If anybody knows, let me know in the comments down below. As far as flippability, it flips really well. All the Emersons flip really well. And it's shocking to get an Emerson. Like after you've had them for a long time, I've owned Emersons for over a decade, off and on. And they always hold a place in my heart. But to get one that drops shut, it throws you off. And I know it's, you know, super common, right? In the knife world, drop shut knives, bearings, nothing new. But to get it in an Emerson is still like, wow. And I also will admit that I like it more than I thought I would. I was always kind of defending the slow roll. You know, I'm like, there's plenty of flippers, there's plenty of bearings. That slow roll, the nice smooth roll, that's awesome. And it is awesome. But it's also cool to easily spider flick an Emerson, especially an Emerson of this size. This is a large knife. So that is very, very cool, and I really, really like it. The other thing that I was hesitant on with this knife is I bought a sheepdog when they first came out, way back in the day. One of the earlier ones I picked up, and it had so much detent play. I went back and watched my video on it. It had so much detent play. It was almost 1/4 of an inch of movement in that detent. I'm less mad about it now and more wondering how is that even possible. Now that I know more about how detents and things work, I don't even know, because like you'll get play in the detent every once in a while, and it just has to do with, is the detent hole correctly lining up with the ball, which is then interacting with the blade stops, and if there's any extra play, if the hole's too big, all kinds of things will give you a little bit of wiggle. But the amount of movement I was getting on that sheepdog, but then still having it be some sort of detent, it's very confusing, especially going back and watching it now. I wish I could go back in time and take that apart and try to see how is that even happening. But this one has none of that. So, you know, it's nice and good. The detent on there, it's crisp, it's excellent. This uses your standard detent. You know, it's liner lock with the detent ball in the hole. Everything just lines up. Now let's get to, so overall, I really, really like this knife. I think it lends itself super well. I think I spit on my blade right there. I think it lends super well to the flipper. And one of the coolest features, right, of it, which is probably only cool if you're into Emersons, is the fact that the flipper tab perfectly fits in and hides in the existing finger choil here of the original design, right? When it's open, it looks like a normal CQC-8. The only time you even know it's a flipper is when it's closed. And it's also pretty cool, happy accident, that really all they did was just follow these same lines for that flipper tab. Obviously, it kind of cuts up a little bit there, but it's perfectly positioned to be a flipper, right? See how it's right in line with this pivot? I mean, it's right there. So pretty kind of cool, happy accident that you could incorporate a flipper into this design and have it disappear without doing anything weird. It just kind of did that, and it just works. Only thing that bugs me on this knife, and I haven't quite figured it out, and it's a little bit of a shame. For a lot of people, it's not a big deal. Like, it's not actually a big deal, but it's one of those, when you're into knives and you like things to be perfect, kind of like how I mentioned the sloppiness of the detent. That's a pet peeve of mine. It just kind of bugs me. It doesn't affect the knife, still functions. This one has a little bit of movement when it's locked. I don't know if you can see that. It wiggles a little bit. Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. But it's not slipping. It's not the lock failing. Lock is rock solid. It's not anything like that. It just is not, you can see it move a little bit there. It's just not completely tight. I took this apart. I tried to figure out what exactly is going on. What I think it is, and I could be wrong, is that it's having some movement this way, right? So it's not movement, like normally if you have lock, slip, or failure, you're actually getting movement like kind of radius this way, right? As the force is pushing down here, this is moving out, and the bottom of the tang is actually moving down. Like it's kind of pivoting. I think this is just going this way. And my guess is it has to do with the pivot. So Emerson does a captured pivot where it's not perfectly round, it has a flattened side on the back, and that's to keep the pivot from spinning, right? It locks it into place, and it's locked in on both sides. And I'm thinking there's just a little bit of light tolerances there, maybe. It's allowing that to move, but only because of where the stop pin is right above. I'm assuming it has to do with where the stop pin is, because the stop pin is right up here. And so if the stop pin's right here, it's allowing it to just move ever so slightly, which is not, so on my sheepdog, do not have that issue whatsoever. But the stop pin's back here where it more traditionally would be. So that's the only thing I can think of. Like I said, it is not the lock moving. Because if you, let's do a little test here, just to make sure I am not completely wrong here, now that I think about it. So if we put something in this lock and really kind of hold it in place, I mean, it still filled it a little bit, but it almost seems like it helped. But so I'm forcing that lock over. You know, that did kind of help. Maybe I will take it apart and see if there's something else I can do there. It is kind of interesting, though. So I will also say, if you guys are still hanging out, I applaud you. As I try to figure this stuff out and think through it, you can hear my brain trying to figure it out. There is another thing that's interesting on this knife that I noticed, and that is I haven't had any lock stick on it, and the lock bar is really easy to disengage. And yet, when I open it up, it's bent over as much as it should be, or as that you would expect. So, I don't know. Does it have a little bit of lock rock on it? And is that what I'm actually feeling? And that's why it doesn't have any stick, because this lock bar isn't fully engaging? That could be. Stay tuned. I'm going to have to take this apart and see if I can bend it over more. My concern would be that, you know, it's not a super early lockup. So let's see. Let us see, and we will take a look. All right, guys, I'm going to go work on that right now, grab my stuff, and see if I can fix that issue. And I may have to actually reshoot this whole video, because now I've rambled off and talked all crazy, and I don't know what's going on. All right, guys, catch you later.